Hey, everybody. Welcome to Retire with Style. I'm Alex. I'm here with Wade, and we have a guest, recurring one at that, Brian Bass over at McLean Asset Management. Just to give you a little, practical sort of review of what we're talking about as we go through this Social Security arc. And Wade, I think I hit the record button a hair too soon. You had said, hang on. Did I hit it too soon, or are we in good shape?
No, we're good. I was going to double check that I'm talking through the right mic, but I'm 99.9% sure that I am. So let's just go with it.
I don't know. What do you think? What do you think, Brian? What's the probability that he's on?
Wade's a rock star. I think he's got it dialed in.
All right, he's dialed in.
My roadies check that out beforehand.
All right. And since we did have some time pass between the last podcast, and we got so many wonderful write-ins about how much they enjoy these personal snippets of our lives that serve as a preamble to this podcast. Wait, has anything happened since the last episode has been released?
Well, if you're watching, you see I've shaved, and that was more due to the lack of symmetry with trying to shave without a mirror. So I just decided to start over. So that explains the current situation. But that's only if you're watching on YouTube. Which one of the outlets we have that we don't really emphasize.
So thank you for bringing that up.
Yes, we don't get a lot of YouTube watchers. It's mainly through podcasting services, but that's out there if anyone would like to.
It's a good visual.
Yes, Wade. Wade is
you look great,
What was that? What was that movie? I think it was Modern Problems. Like Dabney Coleman, who's, I think, a hugely underrated actor. I think it was Dabney Coleman, Nick Carter, and Chevy Chase. An old movie. I think it was 1980s. It was Brian. It was just like when HBO started becoming available in homes, and like Modern Problems was one of the first movies that they kind of released. I must have seen it like so many times. And there's a piece where he's walking down the beach, Dabney Coleman. He's like, he's like recording a biography or something, and he ends up he his closing statement is, "And I'm a damn good looking guy." Wade, you're a damn good looking guy without that beard on. So congrats.
Guess we're inadvertently encouraging the YouTube channel today.
Yes. So all you that want to see the real deal, go to YouTube and check them out. Please write on the comments. I would beg you to write in the comments on the YouTube. That'd be awesome. And what about you, Brian? It's been a while since we've seen you lately. What's been happening, man? What's the trajectory of a day in the life of a financial advisor at this time of the year looking like?
Once we got through April 18th, we're good to go.
Really?
Q4 and Q1 are tough every year. Yep.
Okay. Do you want to take a guess among us three which one of us was most likely to file an extension?
Oh, I already know the answer to that
one. Which one was like, I don't have enough time. Let me just file an extension and move on. Yes, that was Wade. For all you listeners, it was Wade.
No, I'm on top of that.
No. It was me. But I blame my knee surgery, Wade.
Alex is.
Which thank you for asking me how I'm doing. I really appreciate the empathy there.
Well, that was weeks and weeks ago at this point.
Weeks ago? What are you talking about? That was like last Monday. This is like,
yeah. Well,
it was just like, I don't know, 10
when
days
this is
ago.
Broadcast. That's an old hat at this point.
Yeah, man.
It feels like months ago.
Yeah, right. Well, this is my second one, so there we go. All right. So what are we talking about today, Wade?
Well, yeah, this is now the third episode on Social Security, and we're talking about where we left off last time was, so what are reasons people might want to claim early rather than delaying towards 70? And the last item was this fear that Social Security is about to disappear, and therefore it's important to get out something from the system while you can before it's too late. And we said, well, we'll have a whole episode about that point, kind of getting into what Social Security is all about in terms of its history, its outlook, reform possibilities, and so forth, really to discourage people from thinking they're not ever going to get any Social Security benefits, to give a realistic assessment about Social Security's future prospects, just driven by what we've seen happen in the past as well.
Wait, I could have sworn we were going to talk about how passive investing is like fielding a baseball team. and how you need
Oh
certain
yeah, that was on the brainstorming list.
right? Isn't that why Brian's here? What's going on?
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know
Brian,
if all
right? Isn't that what we were talking about today?
it is.
Well, Brian
That's
is
exactly right.
pushing on Bob to be our most frequent guest, but have we ever mentioned Brian is a former Major League Baseball pitcher? I don't know if that's come up.
I haven't. He's very special regardless of that. So I don't.
That's a good word for it. I am definitely special. That's right.
No. We'll hit him up with a podcast like that in a future time, right, Brian?
That's I'm in for that one.
Yeah. But no, today is the Social Security one, and we thought Brian would be a great guest simply because we're going to go through the history of it. Wade has some trivia about who the first person was on Social Security and the like.
Not just for the trivia reasons. But
Riveting.
There's a broader
Riveting.
lesson.
Oh, okay. There you go. All right. Well, bated breath. We're all waiting. But I think it's helpful for Brian to give his 2 cents with regards to what are the conversations that you have with folks when it comes to, oh my goodness, how do I plan for Social Security? Not the claiming strategy, but is Social Security going to be around? And what emotional components do you hear around that, and how do you sort of guide them towards that? So I think it's a good way to add color to this. All right, Wade, my man, take it away, man. Do your thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, it all starts in 1935. That's when Social Security was.
Sorry. That had an in the beginning kind of vibe to it. So 1935, go. Sorry.
America was roiled in the Great Depression. The Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal was meant to help bring prosperity to Americans struggling during the depths of the Great Depression. And as a part of that, Social Security was social insurance to provide initially retirement benefits in terms of it's not a welfare system. It was never meant to be welfare. It was always you contribute into Social Security and you're entitled to then receive a benefit from Social Security to fund your retirement. And it was designed to be pay as you go. The whole idea of the trust fund wasn't part of the initial idea. It was always the current workers' payroll taxes would fund the benefits to the current beneficiaries. And that's really what it's tried to do. Now, we'll get to this point and try to tell a linear story here. We do have a trust fund now because of some of the demographic changes going on. But that was always the idea. Current workers pay payroll taxes, which entitles them to a benefit in the future. But we're not trying to just save that money or set that money aside. That money would then be used to pay the benefits to the current beneficiaries. It started with retirement benefits. That was in 1935. In 1939, they added spousal benefits and dependent benefits to minor children for survivors when the survivor benefits. They've added disability benefits over the years. They've added the cost of living adjustment in 1972. They're always tweaking the system, always trying to get it on track. Ideally, they want to have Social Security be balanced over the next 75 years, just meaning that over the next 75 years, the projected inflows of contributions through payroll taxes will fund the promised benefits over that time period. Now, that can be a struggle because of demographic changes. And so in that regard, people are living longer. We have now the baby boomer cohort is still a very large cohort of individuals who are in the process of retiring. We'll talk to Jason Fichtner next, I believe in the next episode, and he coined the term peak 65, which is just that in 2024, we're going to have 12,000 people a day reaching the age 65. It's a huge cohort of individuals. So those are people who are now all going to be claiming Social Security benefits at some point. They're living longer, and they've had fewer children. So when you look at the number of beneficiaries to the number of current workers contributing into the system, that's coming down, which in a pure pay-as-you-go system makes it harder to fund benefits because you have fewer workers contributing per beneficiary. And then for that trivia, so the next time you're on Jeopardy, she was the first recipient of Social Security benefits, who is Ida Mae Fuller. I wanted to bring that up, not for the trivia of it, but because it shows another problem. I started with the idea that Social Security was created during the Great Depression. And so today it's based on your top 35 years of earnings. But they didn't want to start off that way right away in terms of, okay, here's Social Security, but no one's going to get any benefit till they've contributed for years and years. So Ida Mae Fuller was the first recipient of Social Security. She contributed into the system for 3 years before retiring and starting her benefits in the end of January 1940. She contributed $24.75 into the system. And I would think this kind of stuff would be private, but it is on the Social Security Administration website.
It's not part of
Because
HIPAA?
they didn't have this.
No,
Her initial monthly benefit was $22.54. So in just a little over a month, she already had a positive internal rate of return on her contributions. She ended up living to age 100, so she's somewhat unique in that regard, in that not everyone, especially at that time, was living to be 100. But she paid almost $25 into the system, and over her lifetime received $22,888.92 in benefits from the system.
So,
It's a little bit unique in that regard, but it points to early recipients got a lot more out than they paid in. And that's the other sort of funding issue that we have to deal with as well, is not only do we have fewer workers contributing to pay for current beneficiaries, but we've always been having to fund those early cohorts who are getting much more out of the system than they contributed.
so you're saying in the pantheon of great investments of all time, it's opening up a pack of cards and getting Honus Wagner, being an original investor with Warren Buffett when he opened up his investment sort of group, and Ida Fuller.
Yes, being the first recipient of Social Security, contributing for 3 years and getting a lot more out of the system than you contributed into it. Yeah, that would, in terms of the implied rate of return on her contributions, it's just astronomical. So that's then the system and the situation. It's hard to keep Social Security in balance over the next 75 years. In 1975, that was the last time there was really becoming an emergency. That in 1975, the trustees reported Social Security would be out of funds. Not out of funds. That's where, because it was pay as you go, there would not be enough incoming contributions to pay for beneficiaries as of 1979.
But this is an important point. This is an important point, Wade, and I just want to interrupt it just for a second, just to have more of a conversation. But this is an ongoing theme that you've seen, right? Not just since the 30s. 30s was established, and there needed to be some adjustments. But once it got going, you could say since the 70s, there have been echoes of, hey, this is effectively not sustainable, and it's only a matter of time. And so let's throw out a lot of skepticism with regards to relying on this system for your retirement. All right, is that a correct statement on my part?
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. I mean, it was never meant to be the sole source of income in retirement. It was meant to just make sure people had enough to get by on, not to necessarily maintain the same lifestyle.
Well, one of the stools, if you will, right?
Yeah, that
or one of the legs of the stool. Yeah, the legs.
It wasn't the whole stool. That wasn't the point.
Yes.
It's not meant to be the whole stool. It was meant to be a leg. And yeah, I mean, at that time, the reforms, which this will be a reoccurring theme, increased taxes and maybe reduced benefits a little bit. That got the system a little bit back on track. But then by the early 1980s again, same situation. And then here's some more trivia. Alan Greenspan, who became probably the most famous Federal Reserve chairman we've had, headed a commission to reform Social Security. And so the 1983 reforms were really kind of guided through his commission, enacted through Congress, that set up a lot of what really Social Security looks like today, in terms of that's when the full retirement age was pushed from 65 towards 67, though very gradually. The first people who have that age 67 retirement age were born in 1960. We still haven't got to the point where that's the full retirement age. They were 23 years old at the time of the reform that suddenly, if you're 23 years old, you read in the paper, well, I thought Social Security was going to start at 65. It's not going to start until 67. That's a benefit cut. They did other changes. They increased payroll taxes. They introduced the taxation of Social Security benefits. It wasn't the complete system we have today where up to 85% of your benefits were taxed. They were going to tax benefits up to 50%.
But you're
Of your
seeing a
benefit
theme
would
where
become-
it starts. So you're seeing these themes though arise, right? It's almost like when there's a shortfall in financial planning. There's only so many things you can do, right, Brian? I mean,
exactly.
The first one would be retire later, which lo and behold, Alan Greenspan, in all his wisdom, in all his rational exuberance, said, "Hey, let's extend the retirement date." Sound familiar? And if you're gonna throw in tax at a higher rate, well, that's like invest. Invest a little more. Say your savings rate. If it was analogous to a plan, it's like increasing your savings rate, right? I mean, there's only so many things that can be done, right?
There's only so many levers.
You can
save more, spend less, work longer.
Voila, government policy.
That's retirement planning in a nutshell.
Exactly.
But
it's that easy. I don't understand.
Well,
What would
that's
when the trust fund. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, well, this is about the trust fund, and what are your thoughts here, Wade? And we're a firm in DC, so we get it. We want to be as politically agnostic as possible. That being said, what are your thoughts of the argument that, well, you're taxing this or you're extending this, but this is my money that I've paid into, and I'm going to exaggerate to make the point. It's my God-given right to get every penny that I put in out to the maximum extent. What is the government's kind of view on that, without us kind of picking sides, if you will?
Well, the formal view there's a Supreme Court case, the Nestor v. Fleming. You don't have any property rights
Jeopardy
to your
again,
Social
by the
Security. I believe that's the name, but you don't have any property
flex,
rights.
Brian? Did you see that flex right there?
I did.
Wow.
I believe it was 1960.
Go ahead, Wade.
In 1960, the Supreme Court clarified you do not have a property right to your presently legislated benefit. Congress does have the authority to change your benefits as they'd like to. So it's a program. It's not a welfare program. You contribute in to receive a benefit from the system, but you don't have any sort of property right over the idea that when I made these contributions, Congress was promising me this, so they have no right to reduce what they promised me. Congress is allowed to reduce the promises, reduce the legislated benefit that you're entitled to, change the formula for how your benefit is calculated, and so forth.
So they have a not so fast kind of button.
Right.
Effectively. All right.
Now, of course, it's politically unpopular to do that. So when they do these types of reforms, and I was kind of hinting at this with the 1983 reforms, they don't necessarily reduce benefits for existing beneficiaries all that much. They push it off to the younger generations. And we'll talk more about that too, with the different types of reforms and how different reforms, who they impact more, current beneficiaries versus future, current contributors.
Because the point you made with the Greenspan sort of commission was when they pushed it from 65 to 67, in reality is the people that faced the full brunt of that impact, they were just 23 years at the time. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like the people that were 60, 65 all of a sudden are like, oh, what just happened?
Right. If you were 64 in 1983, it wasn't like, oh, I thought I could start my benefit next year. Now I have to wait 2 more years. Those people were not impacted by the increase in retirement age.
It was more the people who weren't voting yet. Or not, they were allowed to vote, but most likely weren't voting as frequent.
Or the less cynical way to frame it would just be that people who still had a longer runway to make adjustments so that they would be able to kind of get back on track with the change in the policy.
There you go.
And also, there was this recognition of the demographics. So that's when they started to say, okay, we should build up the trust fund now because in the future, there'll be fewer and fewer contributors. And so to anticipate these sorts of funding problems, let's build up a trust fund to be able to manage the pressures in the future, that the number of beneficiaries in the future will be higher.
So you're saying
And
the
that's where
government
we
kind of
are.
saw the peak 65 coming.
Yes. Yes, the peak 65 was known to the people back in 1983 as well.
Oh, okay.
Although it was in the distant, it was still 60 years in the, no, not 60, 40 years in the future at that point.
Yeah, but there was still some
41 years.
foresight with regards to that.
So then we're like, recently the 2023 trustees report came out, and in talking about, there's the disability insurance trust fund, there's the old age and survivor benefit trust fund. So sometimes people need to clarify which one they're talking about, but the combined, and it's okay to combine them because Congress also can just move back and forth. The combined old age, survivors and disability insurance fund is now anticipated to deplete in 2034. And that's where the headline is, oh, there will be no more Social Security after 2034. That, because it's a pay-as-you-go system, that's not what it means. It's after 2034, the incoming contributions immediately can fund close to 80% of the promised benefits. But over the subsequent 25 or 75 years, you'd have to like have a across-the-board benefit cut of 25% to get the system into balance over the next 75 years, so that the payroll taxes from that smaller tax base are able to fund the benefits promised.
You said over the
in a
next
sustainable
75
manner.
years, being that
Yeah, it's
like year
always done.
76, we're back in action. We're back in the game.
Yeah, right, yes. After 75 years, and even after a few years, you're no longer in a 75-year balance anymore if it's an ongoing downward spiral. But yes, that's the idea. Over the next 75 years, a 25% benefit cut is projected to keep the system in balance, if
So,
nothing else is done.
so Brian, just to bring it a little bit, start interweaving a little bit of client communication piece. So, if someone hears the term or someone hears the phrase offhand, in 2034, Social Security is kaput. Wait, I'm kind of trying to reframe here. You're really saying it's not that it's kaput. It's just, yeah, benefits will be reduced, and according to the machinations that you just laid out, right? I fear getting it wrong, so I'll just leave it at that. That's where, but the essence of what you're saying is yes, but, and the but is what you just said. No, well, really, it'll be a 25% haircut for everyone for a certain number of years, and that's if there are no adjustments made by the government, which will most likely not be the case. But is that when you start hearing clients sort of come up to you, or prospects come up to you and start sort of saying, hey, 2034 is the witching hour in terms of Social Security, so we can't plan past that?
Basically, yeah, it's so sensationalized in the media that anytime you see the big headlines from any of the big networks, the phone will start ringing. You'll get some emails, and a lot of it is just clickbait. I mean, they don't take the time to explain the story. They don't go into the depth. Obviously, is what Wade's doing, and it leads to those awkward conversations that you have to kind of explain how the system's working and how it's built and what that actually means. So, first of all, thank you, Wade, for for leading the charge on this and kind of helping us, giving us the ammo to go and have these conversations, because people do they get scared for no reason, not necessarily for no reason, but for unfounded reasons. And sometimes you just have to explain and lay out the groundwork of what's really going on, and it usually helps calm people down.
And wait, I've seen a couple of presentations that you do on this, and I don't know if you do it as a goof or if actually you look this up and this is the case. Do more people believe in UFOs than Social Security, than believing that they can't rely on Social Security? I don't know if you're just saying that as a goof or that's
No,
an
no, no.
actual
That
fact.
was, well, when I was doing an internship in Washington, D.C. in the late 1990s, just walking around the mall, National Mall on the weekend, I received a brochure that was making this point. It was from an advocacy group, but no, it said the survey was more people believe in UFOs than believe they can rely on Social Security. And so that, yes, that was in the late 1990s. So this is a concern that's not new at all. It's been around.
Okay. All right. So, Wade, what I get out of that one is, so you're telling me you're walking in the mall and you use this for all your presentations. You're walking in the mall of Washington, D.C. Someone gives you a pamphlet that says more people believe in UFOs than the stability of than the stability of Social Security. And your conclusion is, hey, this must be true. Let me put this on presentations.
Maybe not
So much
the best.
for citations or anything like that. Is
I
that what
should
you're
probably
saying?
use Wikipedia. I probably shouldn't
Exactly.
use brochures I pick up on the National Mall. But it illustrates this point. And I mean, I don't even, it's from an advocacy group that was
That must be true.
trying to encourage reform before it's too late, I suppose, at that
No, I'm
time in
messing
the
with
late
you, man.
1990s.
All right. And so
But
where were we then with that? So you said Social Security as is. So, but until 2034, we're fine. What are some things that, as opposed to kind of revamping the whole thing, or everyone taking a huge haircut, where are we?
Well, yeah, I mean, in terms of until 2034, we're fine, so to speak. But and also just one other point, I mentioned the idea that Congress can change benefits, but Congress would have to do that. It's not a matter of in 2034 we just have an across the board 25% benefit cut. People are entitled to their presently legislated benefits and could sue to get them. Congress would actually have to step in and legislate a 25% benefit cut. And if they're going to go to that effort, that's probably not going to be the final proposal that they stick with. It's likely they're going to have a broader package of reforms, like what happened in past cases as well, that ultimately is probably going to be some sort of mixture of benefit cuts and tax increases, but also benefit cuts that wouldn't necessarily be applied to existing beneficiaries, but more that are introduced over time. And let's talk about what those reforms could potentially be. I think it's the easiest way to go forward with that. And so there's certain reforms that would not impact current retirees. And then there's certain reforms that would impact current retirees. So if we're talking about not impacting current retirees or people who are close to retirement, just increasing the payroll tax rate. That doesn't impact current retirees.
Great.
Just full stop. And the numbers on that in the current trustees report. In the 2023 trustees report, they say right now the combined payroll tax for Medicare, so I guess not including Medicare, is 12.4% for the Social Security Old Age Survivors and Disability Fund. If you increase that by 3.61% immediately, that would give you the 75-year balance.
Yeah, but you're talking percentage points. You're not talking
percentage points. So yeah, the 12.4 would become, what is that? 16.01%.
So you're welcome again. Kind of response.
Thank you for that clarification. If we wait, and this is where the sooner things get going, the better off people are. If we wait till 2034, it would require an immediate tax increase of 4.15 percentage points to 16.55 percentage points to get projected balance over the next 75 years. So that would solve it all by itself. You could increase the tax rate by that over 4 percentage points. You could cut benefits by 25%, or you could do some sort of balance of those. And you probably draw from some different pieces of this.
And what would be the limit of income on that payroll tax?
Well, yeah, I mean, something else that's discussed is this idea of just raising the cap on the maximum taxable earnings. In 2023, that 12.4% payroll tax rate shared between employees and employers, or if you're self-employed, you pay that full amount. That's capped, though, at $160,200. And that could be raised. It currently increases each year.
To be clear, what that means is anything you earn above that is not added
taxed
to that mix. You're just taxed on that first 167.
Mm-hmm. And so something we want 160, 200. We have heard a number of proposals that would reintroduce that tax after, say, it drops to zero, but then if you're earning more than $450,000, that's usually the number I hear for that, it gets reintroduced again at that point. or you simply could remove the cap entirely, or there's different ways you could play around with that. And that is a pretty hefty tax increase. Of course, it applies to those higher income individuals, but 12.4% is quite a bit. And if you just remove that cap entirely, that would work towards solving much of the long-term trust fund problems. It would be a big tax increase for those individuals, obviously, as well. So that's another angle there. Just increase the payroll tax up to the existing cap, or increase the existing cap, or a combination of the two. You could gradually raise the full retirement age, like which was done in 1983. So sometimes you'll hear suggestions around the full retirement age, instead of being 67, maybe it should be 70. That would be what that kind of reform would do. And that would probably be gradual, like it was in 83.
Obviously you can see a mix of everything, right? But you're talking 40 years ago at this point. And so you're talking with advances in longevity and the like, you could see that being actually a lot of meat on that bone, if you will.
Yeah, and a number of other countries do formally make a link where they link the retirement age will be linked to longevity improvements. So as people keep living longer, the full retirement age will be raised accordingly. I guess the idea is intergenerationally to let everyone have the equal amount of retirement. Because it does get costlier and costlier. Like when Social Security was created, people turning 65 were not expected to live into their 90s all that frequently. That's becoming more and more common today. The only thing about increasing the full retirement age is it's considered a regressive reform, meaning that it impacts people who have to do manual labor versus office workers. It's harder to work to those later ages. And so such individuals are more negatively impacted by an increase in the retirement age. And so from an equity perspective, that's not always on the top of the list of desired reform options.
I guess the flip side to that could be, and again, this is just us having a conversation, could be, well, but if they do some of that and then they adjust the payroll tax cap, because you would think the payroll tax cap will affect the knowledge workers more than the, the workers that you just mentioned, it kind of begins to balance out a bit.
Yeah. So you can develop your own package of proposals and send it off to your local congressperson.
Yes.
That's going to be an interesting pitch to the younger generations, though. No one wants to hear retirement age going to 70 or 75. Everyone wants it to go younger. They're looking at retiring younger and trying to make.
I don't think younger is going to be an option, though, right?
Right. But through the lens of the who you have to sell this to in Washington D.C., it's going to be who's the constituents that is going to buy into this program.
Yeah, I think we should introduce these ideas first in France and see how they react.
I was just thinking that too.
See how they react, and then we like adjust, course correct. What do you think, Wade?
We could try that. We did it in '83 without any riots. At least I don't remember any riots happening when we increased the retirement age last time. But in France, it's 62 to 64. It was the current idea in France, and that created a lot of upheaval.
62 to 64, and no croissants on Sunday, something like that. Weird.
Yeah. Well, there you go. But another option, one that I don't like, and one that's actually harder to understand, and so it's easier to trick people with it, is to switch from wage indexing to price indexing. And I think in the next episode, we're going to have Mary Beth Franklin on as a guest, who's going to do some of those topics I skipped over about specifically the mechanics of how benefits are calculated and so forth. And we did talk about wages tend to grow faster than prices. And so to explain this in one sentence, the switch from wage indexing to price indexing just means the younger you are, the lower your benefit's going to be in the future, because you're not getting to benefit from those wage increases anymore. It's going to permanently lock in benefits at the price level when that reform happens, whereas over time we project standard of livings to improve. And so people, their Social Security benefits would become smaller and smaller. Is there a quick example
that you have with that, just so they fully appreciate price index?
Well, the price index is inflation, the consumer price index.
Like,
Yeah.
is there like a general CPI, or is there a specific basket that they
Oh,
have?
yeah. Yeah, the Social Security uses the CPIW, not the CPIU that is commonly quoted whenever we talk about CPI. But that's for, now I might mix it. I think urban and clerical workers, or it's the CPIU is the commonly used price index, but Social Security uses the CPIW to be different. Let's
And
just leave it at that. I
is
don't
there a
remember
Jeopardy
exactly.
answer for a CPIW, or we'll pass on that one? We'll let Mary Beth answer that one for us.
Yeah, well, she can.
We'll lean on her.
Yeah, we'll do that. Okay.
All right.
Those are the main things, just real brief. What they talked about in the 1990s was investing the trust fund in stocks. It's kind of interesting about the trust fund. It's invested in non-tradable U.S. government securities, which I lived overseas for 10 years and focused more on pension systems in developing countries. And the IMF and the World Bank are active in kind of providing guidance to governments about things like this. And they highly discourage using the pension fund of a country to fund government spending. So the U.S. doesn't exactly pass muster with IMF recommendations in this regard, because we have non-tradable U.S. government debt being used to, the trust fund is not able to trade their securities. They just put them in a filing cabinet at the Social Security Administration in Baltimore. So just the idea there is, let's not do that. Let's invest in asset classes that may offer a higher risk-adjusted return.
But you think that's possible?
That was a reform proposal considered in the 1990s that didn't really end up making it very far. And in hindsight, I don't know. It's tough because Social Security is big, so it becomes a very major player, and then you get into all the issues around how do you vote with the shareholder meetings and so forth and so on. And
I think it was. I remember when the Gore Bush campaign, if I remember correctly.
Well, that's not something that exists. You mean the Clinton Gore?
Sorry. Yeah. Exactly. I remember there were no. They were talking about, like, there was like, hey, we're good here. Let's push it here. And a few years later, you had the dot-com crash. I think that just silenced all of that up real fast.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and then it switched to the second Bush. George W. Bush talked about personal retirement accounts, carving out part of Social Security and investing it like a 401k plan. And that didn't make it very far either. That also, we talked about these, like the unfunded liabilities, the Ida Mae Fuller that we're having to pay for. That does make it hard to carve out and privatize Social Security into personal, like a 401k plan, because we also are supposed to pay for all the promised benefits of existing workers and beneficiaries. So that makes that reform harder to do, and it also did not get very far either. But right now we're just talking about reform ideas that don't impact current retirees. And that wouldn't, unless they say, okay, we're going to privatize Social Security and there's no more money for current beneficiaries, so you're out of luck, which is probably not how such a reform would end up being structured.
So as we have it so far, in terms of reforms that will not impact. So Brian has a client who's retired, and they're talking about Social Security reforms. You would think, and I'm going under the assumption of retirees, vote more, for lack of a better word, than others. Things that could happen, and this would come, the people that carry the weight here would be folks like us, right? And, to a large extent, but this would be increased payroll tax, increase the maximum taxable earnings, increase retirement age, wage indexing, switch from the wage indexing to the price indexing, potentially expand the investments and what can be invested in, the purview of what's invested in, or possibly even maybe creating personal retirement accounts. That's kind of the gist of what you're saying, Wade?
Yep, you nailed it.
Wow, I can read a slide, huh? Huh, Brian?
Nice work, Alex.
Did you see that? Did I make it sound natural? Did it sound natural? I was doing the maybe.
Coming up with those off the tongue.
Rolls off the tongue.
Well played.
What about reforms that would impact current retirees?
Yeah. So that's, if we're going in that direction too, just when you're hearing about Social Security reform, things that would impact current retirees, reduce the cost of living adjustments. So currently, every year, the Social Security benefit is adjusted for that CPIW index that came up earlier in the conversation. And you could change that. You could change to a price index that doesn't increase as rapidly. You could just say whatever that price index is, but less 1 percentage point. So if inflation was measured at 5% last year, your benefit increases by 4% instead of 5%. Something that would just cause the benefits to grow more slowly over time. That's a benefit. All of these are going to be benefit reductions because that's the only way you can impact current retirees. But that's one way you could reduce benefits. You could change the formula. Right now, your top 35 years of average index monthly earnings are used to calculate your benefit. You can increase that number. So to the extent that people may not have worked as long or starting to add zeros to the calculation and so forth, that would be another way to reduce benefits. This did come up with before, like you could actually link benefits to, as people live longer, it automatically reduces benefits, and you might start that sooner rather than later to distinguish it from just raising a fixed increase in the full retirement age. But it's more like, okay, starting now, whenever we see longevity improving, we're going to raise the full retirement age accordingly, would be the idea of that reform. You could introduce means testing for benefits. And this is the one idea that people may have a greater justification to be concerned about, especially if they're deemed like a higher earner within the system. And that it would turn Social Security into more of a welfare program. It would be somehow ruling that if either your modified adjusted gross income exceeds a certain threshold or however they want to do it, you just simply wouldn't be entitled to the benefits that you've been promised. That seems unlikely because it goes against the whole history of Social Security not meaning to have any sort of stigma. It wasn't meant to be a welfare program. It was meant to be, you paid into the system, you get something out of it. But I have heard politicians mention it, so it's not completely off the table as a reform.
But I think you're being nice by saying, "Oh, we don't want it to be a stigma, so we don't want to do it." I think it's more the other way around. That we don't want to have to just exclude a whole subset of people because we will not be reelected. I think that's
well, any benefit cut is not going to be politically popular, of course. But
yeah, I guess, yes. yeah. But still, that one
and especially if you also raise the maximum taxable earnings and means test the benefits, that's really a double whammy.
Yeah, but and what we're not doing in this podcast is you could take any one of these points and really say, if we increase it by 1%, it puts us into the black by this many more years, etc. So all of these have a lot of sway. Which one of these, Wade, and without getting into like the specific Excel optimizations and things like that, because we just don't need to here. Which one of these carry move the needle the most for the least amount of effort, if you will, in your opinion or whatnot?
Well, that's a good question. Actually, should have looked this up before we had the podcast, and we could put it into the notes. Don't worry about it. That's what I do. The Public Policy Institute made a nice website that lets you play around, because yes, there have been simulations about how much these different reform options would improve the situation, and you can create your own combination of reforms.
Could you imagine the people doing that and writing to their congressman? I'd be what a nightmare. Like, oh, thank you, Brian. That's great. Duly noted.
If you're going to cut benefits, one that may have the least amount of inequity involved in it is that reduction of the cost of living adjustment. That doesn't solve the full trust fund problem by any means, but it does take a big chunk out of the issue.
I think it takes a village here, so let's go into that assumption.
Yeah, but ultimately it is probably going to be some sort of payroll tax increase, some sort of benefit cut, whether that's simply raising the full retirement age, but something along those lines. And then the other, just on the means testing point, there are stealthier ways to means test besides just telling people, you don't get any benefit because your income is too high. Taxing Social Security is a way to means test. And now up to 85% of your benefits are taxable. That could simply be made 100%.
So he
And
said,
if
yeah,
it,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Did you see how he said a stealthier way? That's like, all right, in Lethal Weapon 3, when Joe Pesci's like, they screw you in the drive-through. That's effectively what you're saying there, right, Wade?
yeah, they could also play around with the formula that calculates the primary insurance amount, where there's these different bend points, and they have different replacement rates for each range of your average index monthly earnings. They could play around with those bend points to make the system more progressive. Higher replacement rate for low earners, lower replacement rate for high earners. There's lots of ways to play around with the system without doing an outright means testing.
So the way I'm reading all of this is that it's just reinforcing. Look, it's not going away. It's not going to turn. There's things that could be done within the realm of possibility and within the realm of political appropriateness that 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 will send Social Security along in its merry way for the next 35, 70, whatnot years. I mean, that's my takeaway. I mean, there's a lot of options here, Brian. But I didn't
Mm-hmm.
get your take. Well, just on a personal level, which one? If you're a betting man, what do you see here in the horizon? Just conversational. Who knows, right?
I think increasing the wage base is probably the easiest and least frictional way to do it. Ultimately, it's a social program in the first place, right? So, I mean, you're taking and cutting into a higher wage base of earner anyway. Um,
I think so.
yeah, that's probably where we go.
I agree.
In
I,
my
I think that one. I think the price indexing, and there was one
Not the
here
price
too that
indexing. That's my least favorite one.
really, but they can
yeah,
do that. People don't pay
the
attention to
the
that. In
wage
my
indexing
world,
to price. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
it will
in my
not be
world, people don't pay
understood.
attention to that, so they can kind of like slip it in there.
I think
And the eighty-five
reducing the
percent tax.
cola, reducing cola is interesting as well.
Yeah, and so that, of course, what that ends up impacting is the oldest individuals, because by the time you're in your 80s and 90s, you've had the most cumulative impact from a reduced COLA. So that's the only concern there, is whether or
That's
not
true.
such individuals are ready to handle a
That's a good point.
lower Social Security benefit in real terms.
That's a
That's
good
kind of
point
the
because
downside of it. But
no, no, no. But to your point, though, not thinking just longer term, they're not going to do something that's going to hurt the older population. If anything, they'll probably, if they're going to err on the side of burdening a population, it'll be probably the younger folks, not necessarily the older ones, with the thinking that we'll solve it somewhere down the line, or we'll quote unquote resolve it somewhere down the line. But again, that's
Mhm.
just talking to talk, right?
yeah, I think ultimately those reforms that impact current retirees are not going to be emphasized. They may be a little bit there, perhaps, but it's going to lean more towards reform options that don't impact current retirees.
Okay, and
Again,
so
in a non-cynical manner, just because such individuals have a longer runway to make adjustments than people
yes,
close to retirement.
in a non-cynical manner, yes.
But you could also interpret it cynically in terms of voting patterns and with different age groups.
Uh, what Brian? So this is kind of like we're doing this, but we're not in the thick of it. We're talking about all these reforms. We're not in the thick of it. So I get the whole point that it's easy for us to kind of be at arm's distance to this decision. What Walk us through a prospect or a client comes up to you, and yeah, let's say there's something on the legislative table on Social Security, and whatever their political proclivities are, it happens to emphasize the negative features of what's on the table to the degree that it looks like, look, it's tenuous at best that I can count on this. Take it away.
Sure.
What does that conversation look like? What are the pain points and counters that you bring up that help? And what do you do in terms of working it into a planning context?
Yeah. I think the biggest part of the early conversation is just education. I think on going back to the taxation piece of the pulling which lever and how do we make this system work. Um, Hardly anyone understands how Social Security is taxed. When they hear 85% of Social Security is taxed, the immediate assumption is, oh my god, I'm paying 85% tax rate on my Social Security benefit. And so part of it is really
Really?
just, yeah, 100%. you talk about the wage base. No one understands what the wage base is, and they hear $160,000. They don't understand how the entire system really is built and how the calculations work. So a lot of it is education up front, and really just turning those questions back around and say, really, okay, what is it about this proposal or this language that you're seeing that is really bothering you? And then we kind of go into it of laying out the actual framework of what's going on behind the scenes. For the people that do have a really good grasp of it, it turns into, okay, let's get into especially for tenured clients that have been around for a long time and we have a really good understanding of their financial plan. It's a lot of stress testing. It's okay, well, let's just assume you're correct, and let's say your benefit gets slashed in half. What does that actually look like for you? And so we'll go in and we'll run those plans that way, with the understanding that this is a very unrealistic scenario. This is, in our opinion, probably not going to happen, but let's just take a look at it and see. And then if you really want to go down this road of being uber conservative and not relying on this stream of income anymore, what levers do we have to pull around your financial plan to make this actually work in this scenario?
And what effect does that have on them when you're showing them, like, okay, let's just assume 50% is gone? And I would say I would put a wrinkle on that. That wait, please be correct me if I'm wrong here. You said kind of at worst in 2035, 2034, whatever the date was, everyone will take a 25% haircut, right? Was it 25%?
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. So if in the plan you do a 50% haircut, you're doing 100% more,
Right?
than like a worst case, if you will. Correct?
Yep.
And if you do that, does that seem to allay their anxieties?
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
I mean, it's plan specific.
They think
right?
it's going to zero. These people think it's going to zero.
Exactly. Some people
Okay.
do. Some people are very, very scared when they see, again, going back to kind of the media portrayal of what's actually happening. If you're in some of those threads on Twitter and whatnot, there's some scary things being thrown around that just don't have a lot of backing.
Yeah,
in
but
reality.
zero is a big number. I mean, zero to go
It's
to
a big
zero.
But that's the thing.
Yeah,
I mean,
wait,
you're
Social
Social
either-
Security benefits are big. So
Yeah,
that's
I mean,
a very conservative
it
assumption.
is. I mean, you read a headline that says the trust fund is going to zero, like with no context and no real, facts behind that
Mhm.
statement. You get scared. It's not if you don't know what's going on, you don't know the system, you don't understand how it's really funded in the first place. That's a scary headline.
Okay, so then just because we're saying this, and you may have said this earlier, Wade, but I think it's important because of the emotional connection right now. How should people interpret the headline, Social Security is going to go bankrupt or is going to be unfundable or whatever the word is in 2034? How should they read that?
They
really?
they should just understand that Social Security was just always meant to be pay as you go, and reform will be needed to keep the system in balance. That will likely involve some sort of either tax increase and or benefit cut. But yes, at most, we're talking about a 25% benefit cut. And the reality is it's probably going to be quite a bit less. And also, it's probably going to be shifted more towards that younger population rather than the population close to or in retirement already. And I'm still well away from my full retirement age. I do assume I'll get 75% of my presently legislated benefit. I do assume a 25% haircut, but I tend to assume very conservative assumptions. And for me, a 25% reduction is pretty conservative.
And
That's
by
a great
pay
point
as you
too.
go, sorry, go on, Brian.
I was just gonna say that's a great point too. When you're working with younger clients in their 30s and 40s, I mean, you can reasonably assume a lower payout rate. It just helps bake into a different savings program. You're increasing your savings rate. You're increasing some of the different assumptions around the plan. And if Social Security doesn't get cut and you get 100% of the benefit, you have a massive payday on the back end of the plan, which affects claiming age. It affects a lot of different levers on the back end that we can pull. But again, to your point, you just kind of want to pay attention to how conservative you're being with those assumptions.
And the other point I'd like to make, that Wade, that you said in addition to this, is that you don't have, just because you paid into it doesn't mean, and I'm repeating what you said, I just want to make sure I did it correctly. Just because you paid into it doesn't mean that the government can't legislate it again for different benefits. But if they do not legislate, and this is what you're trying to get at, if they do not legislate it again, you are entitled to the rights that are in there right now as law. So the government literally has to legislate these reforms. If not, they actually have to pay you these numbers.
Yes, or you would may have to sue for it, but yes, you would be entitled to what you've been promised. There's different laws, and it's going to be a big mess. But effectively, it's not so easy to just say benefits will be cut by 25% if nothing is done.
Exactly.
It's much more something has to be done to make that possible. And
the other thing with this that I want to make sure everyone takes away, and you've said it, and I think it's one of these phrases that you hear. You said at the beginning and you explained it, but again, because of this emotional recency right now, pay as you go. What exactly does that mean again? So everyone, after they listen to this podcast, will remember that.
In a pure pay-as-you-go system, there's no need for a trust fund. It's just every year you collect the taxes from people who are working, paying their Social Security contributions. You take those funds and you use them to pay the benefits to the current beneficiaries.
And that's what we had. That's what you're talking about. In order to make it solvent as a pay-for-you-go system, these are the things that we need to tweak.
Mm-hmm. And that's where the trust fund was built, because of the anticipation that because of the changing demographics, it would become harder and harder to run it as a pay-as-you-go system.
But the demographics are turning into our favor now, because the baby boomers will peak next year, actually.
Well, that's not in our favor from the perspective of funding Social Security.
After like years from now, not right now, coming up.
Oh, yeah, eventually, going past 75 years and so forth.
Right.
Well, I'm an optimist.
Kind of look at
what I was thinking. Once these baby boomers out of the way is what I was thinking.
Yeah, we've got the population pyramids. It used to be a pyramid. Like the biggest cohorts of individuals were at the younger ages, and then as you got older, it got smaller and smaller, and that's changing. And now you've got a different shape. Those population pyramids can't really be called pyramids anymore. There's bigger cohorts at older ages than at younger ages in some scenarios or some cases.
And so Brian, when you do show the plan and all of that, do you see a change in like anxiety? Do you see a change in anything, or is it one of these where they're like, okay, well, at least now I've solved for the worst case, now I can build from there? Or do people believe what they believe and there's nothing you can do about that, really? You just got to accommodate that belief.
No, for the most part, I would say 90% of the people, once you show them kind of a realistic picture and you explain the system and you show them there are different things and the way to fix their plan, they have just a general better outlook than they did before. A lot of times it's really just going into the conversation of, how do we diversify income streams? Obviously, Social Security with, a couple who's been together for a very long time, they both worked for 30 or 40 years. They have a really good benefit for each of them. That represents a big chunk of their retirement income that they rely on every year. And so really it's going in and figuring out, using the reset, really figuring out how they feel about their retirement income, what they want to see from their investment portfolio, and really dialing into that emotional side of, if this one sleeve of my income dries up, what does that look like for my retirement? What does that do to my retirement income? And just helping them think through the different ways to structure things and different ways to go about creating, again, diversified, safe income streams to pair with, a volatile portfolio of stocks and bonds, or even using a different stroke if you're in the top left in the bucketing time segmentation piece. Just helping people understand that there are different ways to do things, and building in as much safety or as much risk into a plan as people are comfortable with.
All right, that's great. Wade, you want any parting thoughts here?
I think we had a good discussion about this and hit on most of the main points. So thank you, Brian, for joining us today and giving us that perspective of interactions with real individuals who are facing these decisions and complications. So really appreciate having you on the show, and thanks to everyone for listening. We'll go ahead and wrap things up today, and we'll have a few more episodes on Social Security. So make sure to stay tuned next week. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks,
for having me,
Brian.
guys.
All right.